This is part 1 of the social media plugin Monarch training from Elegant Themes. Part 1 contains the installation procedure for the installing of any WordPress plugin of Elegant Themes and a complete overview of the Monarch social media plugin. In part 2 you will see most of the other tutorials combined of the special functions of Monarch. You can find part 2 if you click the link in the annotation that will show up here, or you can click the link below the video. Part 3 has the last tutorials, and if you want to watch those, click the link for that video below this video. So let's start with the first short part, the installation of the Monarch plugin. If you want to skip and move on to the complete overview, click the annotation that will show up now, or click the specific link for that part below the video. All videos are courtesy of Nick Roach, who is the owner of Elegant Themes. I just grouped all tutorials into 3 parts, so it's easier for you, and you have all training in just 3 videos you can bookmark. So enjoy the social media plugin Monarch tutorials.
In this tutorial, I'll be showing you how to install a plugin from Elegant Themes. The first thing you're going to want to do is download the plugin from the members area. So click the login button here to log into your account. Once you're logged in, simply scroll down to get a list of all the different plugins that we have available. You'll see a download link, a preview link, and a readme link. The first thing you're going to want to do is download the plugin itself. So click download, and then click the plugin package link to download the plugin. That plugin will download into a zip file. In this case, it's been downloaded to handheld.zip because I downloaded the handheld plugin. Depending on what operating system you're using and what browser you're using, you may have different download settings, but that file will be downloaded to your computer within a downloads folder, and you're going to want to locate that file and upload it to your WordPress website. So go over to your WordPress website and go into the dashboard. And then you're going to want to click the plugins, add new link right here. Now, since we're not going to be using the WordPress.org repository, we're going to upload our own plugin from our own computer. So you're going to want to click the upload plugin button up here, and then click the choose file link to find that file. So since I'm using OS X and I'm using Chrome, this file automatically gets put into my downloads folder. Again, this may be in a different location depending on your computer, so you're going to want to find that handheld.zip or the zip file of whatever plugin you happen to download from our website, and then upload it. So here I select the handheld.zip file, and I click open, and then I click install now. There you go, the plugin has now been uploaded, and you can activate it right here. Click activate plugin, and you're all done. Your plugin has been uploaded, installed, and activated. And the next thing you're going to want to do is learn how to use the plugin, learn how to configure it, and that can be done using the README file. So go back to the members area, and right next to that download link is a README link, and you can click that to learn about your new plugin and how to install it and set it up and all that good stuff. And that's how you install a plugin from Elegant Themes. In this tutorial, I'm going to introduce you to the Monarch plugin. This tutorial will be both basic and holistic, which is to say that I'm going to go over everything, but I'm not going to go over everything in detail. For those various parts that you'd like to learn more about, we have a bunch of different tutorials that goes into every different part of Monarch in great detail. But for this tutorial, I'm just going to give you a basic overview of how everything works and what the Monarch plugin is used for. So, Monarch is a social sharing and social following plugin, and its purpose is to get you more shares and more followers on your basic online social profiles. So Monarch is broken into 2 parts, and that is social sharing and social following. Social sharing is when someone shares an individual post or page on their own feed on Facebook, for example, to all their friends, whereas social following is when someone clicks through to your social profile on Facebook, if you have a business page on Facebook, where they can actually follow you and then listen to all the posts that you post on your own feed. So how do we do this? How do we get you more shares or more followers? Well, we do it with social sharing and social following buttons that are placed throughout your website in different locations and based on different triggers. So for example, let me show you two examples of social sharing and social following. Over here on the left, we have a social sharing sidebar. And it follows you on the page. So if someone's reading this post and they want to share to Facebook or Twitter, Pinterest, Google+, they would click one of these buttons and they would get prompted to share, and they can do so. It also displays, how many times the post has been shared. In this case, I'm working on a test installation, and there have been no shares. So that's why it says 0 there. But those numbers would represent the share count of your page. Over here, we have an example of social following. This is a social follow widget that will link out to your various online profiles and display how many followers you have for each of those profiles. And if you were to click on one of these, it would send you to the actual profile page. So that's the difference between social sharing and social following. Now, for each of these two different types, we have a bunch of different locations where you can kind of place buttons on your page. So let's take a look at social sharing first, which has the most locations and the most options. So once you've installed the Monarch plugin, and if you don't know how to install a plugin, we have a tutorial that will teach you how to do that. So just go back to the documentation page, scroll down to the bottom, and you'll see a tutorial there that goes over how to install a plugin. Once it's been installed and activated, you can access the Monarch settings under the Tools tab where it says Monarch Settings. So Tools, Monarch Settings, you can click that. It's going to bring you into the Monarch Settings page. Now, you'll see that there's a couple different basic tabs here. By default, it's going to place you in the social sharing location, but we also have social follow and some general settings. And each of these has some child settings within them. So let's go over social sharing first. So this is the first page you're going to be greeted with when you install Monarch. Now, social sharing, as I said, they're basically buttons, and you can place them in different locations, and you can see all the different locations here. So what I just showed you a second ago, that hovering sidebar on the left, right here, that's what we call the sidebar. So that's the social sidebar. But there's also a bunch of other different locations, such as Inline, Popup, Flyin, and also media sharing. Okay, so you've seen the floating sidebar location. Let's try out some of these other locations to see exactly what they do. You can hover over any of the locations here and simply click to enable it. You'll get the green check mark there. So I've just enabled the inline location. And then you can hover over those that are enabled. You can see the red minus sign. You can click that to disable it. So I've disabled our sidebar and enabled the inline location. I'm going to save that and refresh our page. You can see our sidebar has gone away. And these buttons in line with our post content have been added. These can be placed automatically above or below the content of your pages and posts. The next location is the pop-up. And enable that. So the pop-up is a lightbox window that pops up with these social sharing buttons. This is probably the most effective location, but also the most aggressive. It really grabs your visitors' attention and will really promote more shares on your site. And you can also control how this pop-up is displayed based on various triggers, which we'll go over later. Next up is the Flyin box. You can refresh our page, and the Flyin is very similar to the pop-up, except that it's a little bit less aggressive. It's a smaller box, and it animates in here at the bottom corner of your page. Just like the pop-up, you can control how that Flyin is triggered. Finally, the On Media location. This is going to automatically detect the images within your posts and add social sharing buttons on hover, as you see here, which is great for photo-centric networks such as Pinterest and Tumblr. So if I'm browsing this post, I see this beautiful image, it makes me want to share the post, you can hover over and click any of these sharing buttons. Alright, so those are the 5 different locations, and these can be used in any kind of combination. So if I want to have on media and inline and the Flyin, then that's totally fine. So just going down here, we have our basic buttons here. We have on media hover, and when you get to the bottom of the post, the Flyin comes in too. So you can kind of play with different combinations. You can even combine the pop-up and the Flyin as well, and have them triggered based on different triggers to kind of get the best and the most shares out of your page. Okay, so if you might have enabled Monarch and turned on these locations and noticed that you might get a warning that you have no locations enabled or no networks enabled, or you might not be seeing any buttons show up. That's because before any buttons will show up, you first have to tell Monarch which networks you'd like to display for social sharing. So you can choose different networks for social sharing and for social following. They work a little bit differently, but if you see the Networks tab here, this is where you can pick which buttons display in all these different locations. So these are our social sharing locations, and this is where you can manage those networks. So if you're new to Monarch, you just installed it, you're probably not going to see any networks here. You're going to get a page like this, and to add new networks, you just want to click the Add Network button, and here you can get a list of all the different networks that Monarch supports, and you can pick and choose which ones you want to use for all your different social sharing locations. You probably want to use some of the most popular ones like Facebook and Twitter, Google+, but there's all kinds of different ones you can use depending on the subject matter of your website and the type of visitors you're having. Your visitors might be using different networks, so just pick ones that you like and save. So I'm going to apply these 4 networks, the same ones I had before. Now once they're applied, you can also change their order, so you might want to order them as well by popularity. Facebook and Twitter, Google+, probably some of the most popular ones. You want to make those prominent, keep them up at the top, or you might want to just arrange them in a way that the colors look nice. It really depends, it's up to you, but you can drag and drop and arrange those as you see fit. Next to each button here, you get the network name. By default, it's going to have the default network name, but you can change that if you like. For whatever reason you want to change. You want to change Google+ to just Google. If you want to spell it out, Google+. Whatever you want to do, it's up to you. Now you're going to notice that Twitter has a unique option here, which is the username option. This is not something that any of the other networks support. And what this will do is when you add in your username here, ours happens to be Elegant Themes, that's our Twitter handle. When someone shares your page, it's automatically going to append @ElegantThemes on their tweet, which will promote your social profile as well. So you can add your username there. So once you've added your networks, simply save, and then they will show up just like this. So let me add a few more just to show you what it might look like with more networks enabled. So I've gone into my network selection, added 4 more, save, refresh. There we go, 4 more have been added. So you can add as many as you like. It's really up to you. Okay, so now that we've learned how to enable and disable different locations, what those locations do, and how to add networks to those locations, next up we're going to dig into the individual options of each location and show you how each can be configured. Okay, first up I'm going to go back to our Locations tab and make sure we have the locations that we want to work with enabled and the ones we don't want disabled. So for now I'm just going to enable only the sidebar, and we can play with those settings. So I've enabled the sidebar location. Now that the sidebar is enabled, I can go over here to the Sidebar tab to configure all the settings for that location. So go over to the sidebar. Now there's a bunch of different settings. You can choose your icon style, the shape, you have a bunch of display settings, custom color settings, as well as post type settings, which allow you to change or to configure where the sidebar shows up on your website based on the different post types that your WordPress installation is using. So like I said before, we have individual tutorials for all these different locations that really dig deep into all the different settings, but I'm just going to do a brief overview and change a few things to show you how it works. So we have the icon style, which is the hover animations, and you can hover over them right here in the dashboard and see which one you like the best. And once you've found one, so I like this kind of slide animation, I think this looks cool, I'm going to select that one, just click it. And you can choose your shape too, so we have squares, or we have rectangle, rounded rectangle, and circles. You can choose between those 3 different shapes. I have the rounded rectangle enabled, but I can change that to a hard edge if I like. Next up is the different display settings. So the intro animation, that's going to affect the animation that's used when you load the page and those buttons fade in or slide in. Right now I have it set to slide in from the right, but I can choose to have it fade in, or I can just disable the animation altogether. Next up, we can choose to display our share counts or not. So this will display the amount of shares, the amount of times your post or page has been shared on each of the networks that you have enabled. So if you go over to our page now, you'll see that there's no counts here, it just has the icons, and they link out to the sharing features of each location. But if we enable share counts, you're going to get a count below each icon, which shows how many times that post has been shared. Now, since I'm working on a fresh new post on my local server, this page actually has never been shared, so all these counts are 0. And that might be the case for your website too. You might have a new blog, a fresh blog. You're just starting out. You're not getting that much traffic yet, and so your posts don't have that many shares. That's not to say that you're not creating great content and that your posts are not share worthy, but you happen to have no traffic, so you have a bunch of zeros everywhere. That's where this minimum count display comes in. So if you notice, when I enabled share counts originally, this new option popped up called minimum count display. This is a threshold that must be reached for each network before a number is displayed. So right now, my page has never been shared. I have a bunch of zeros. If I happen to put a threshold of 30, that means no number will be displayed for each network until the share count reaches at least 30. So this is great for new blogs because it takes away all those zeros and only displays the share counts that you can be proud of. So if I save that, since I have a bunch of zeros already, if I refresh this, I'm not actually going to get any counts. See, nothing is displayed there, but if I happen to have reached the threshold for Facebook and gotten 31 posts, then a 31 would be displayed below the F there. Next is the total shares option. If you enable this, it's going to display a tally of all your shares above the buttons, and you can choose which color that text is depending on the background color of your website. So we happen to be using a white background right now, so I want that text to be dark. So I'm going to keep it dark as it is now. But if you had a dark background on your website, you might choose to have light text instead. So you can see that the total shares here, which, as I said, happens to be 0, but if you had various shares on various networks that you have enabled, it would tally all those up and do a total share display up there at the top. Okay, you can also choose to add icon spacing. This is just going to add a little bit of space between each of our buttons, which is, it's purely an aesthetic choice that you can make. And finally, you can choose to hide on mobile devices. If you have a bunch of different sharing locations enabled, and you say you only want to have one enabled on mobile, you don't want it to get too overwhelming for your mobile visitors, you can choose to hide certain locations on mobile. So if I clicked that and loaded this page on my phone, you wouldn't see those floating sidebars. Finally, we have our color settings. Here you can choose to customize the background color, the background color on hover, the icon color, and the icon color on hover. So if I choose to use custom colors, I can then customize these using the color picker here. So I've chosen a background color of red and a hover color of orange. If I refresh that, see my icons have turned red, and when I hover, they turn orange. So you can play with those, and if you don't like the default colors, you think they're a little bit too, you don't like the rainbow effect, a little bit too colorful, they're really, clashing with your design, well then you can customize them here, make them match your design, tone them down a bit, do whatever you like. Okay, finally, we have our post type settings. This will allow you to enable or disable each location for each different post type that you have registered with your WordPress installation. So WordPress by default comes with 2 different post types, which are posts and pages. And you can see I have the social sidebar enabled for both. Now, since I also have our Divi theme installed, which registers a unique post type called projects that we use for our portfolio module, that also gets listed here, as will any post type that you're using on your website. So for example, if you had WooCommerce installed and you have a bunch of products, well, they use a post type for that called the product post type, and that would show up here, and you could choose to enable or disable that floating sidebar on that post type. So for example, we were looking at a post earlier. If I chose to disable on posts, then that sidebar is going to go away on posts. So here's a post, the sidebar is gone. If we go over to a page, however, then you get to see them. There they are. So then you can choose to enable them or disable them on certain locations. Often we find that blog posts, for example, people are much more likely to share a blog post. It's a unique article with a unique viewpoint, very shareable content, whereas your Contact Us page, no one's probably going to want to share that. In fact, a lot of your pages might not be shareable as your posts, so you might want to disable sharing on your pages and enable on posts, or vice versa, depending on the type of website, the type of pages you have. It's really up to you, but we give you that freedom. And in addition to that, these overall post type settings, you can also enable and disable each location on a per post and a per page basis. So if you were to go to any of those posts, you'll see there's a little meta box that allows you to completely override the location settings. For example, let's say that I wanted sharing sidebar to appear in every single blog post that I make. I really think it makes sense for every single one of our posts to be shared. However, our pages, on the other hand, I think I'd like my home page to be shared, but I don't really want our Contact Us page to be shared. There's no real reason anyone would want to share that with their friends. It's kind of distracting. It takes away from the purpose of the page. Well, in that case, since I only want to display this sidebar on one page, I might disable it here on all pages. And then on that home page, I might edit that and use the custom meta box with our custom Monarch options to enable the pop-up just on those pages, just on that page using the override settings. And if you want to learn more about the override settings, we have a different tutorial about that, so be sure to check that out. Okay, so that's sidebar. Now we're going to move on to the inline settings. Now before we can begin playing with the inline settings, we first have to enable the inline location. So let's go back to the Locations tab. We can disable the sidebar and enable inline and save. Just to remind you, here's what the inline buttons look like. They're automatically placed above or below your content. And we can configure those buttons here in the Inline Settings tab. So click on Inline, and here are all the different settings. Many of the settings are very similar to Sidebar. In fact, we've unified a lot of the settings throughout the different locations. However, there are various options for each location that differ a little bit. So you'll recognize these settings, the icon style and icon shape, which will affect the hover style and the shape of the icon. One of the unique settings with the location, with the inline location, is the location of the inline buttons as they relate to your content. So you can choose to place them above your content, below the content, or above and below the content. So for example, let's say we just want those buttons to appear below our post. I can change that to below content. So here they've been removed from the top. You scroll down, they've been added to the bottom here, below the content and above your comments. Next up is the icon alignment. So I'm going to change this back to above content. And then we can adjust the icon alignment, which affects the alignment of the information within the button. So each button can have an icon, a network name, and a share count. And you can either have these aligned and floated to the left on one horizontal line within the button, or you can have them all centered, stacked up on top of each other. So I've shown you the left aligned option. Let's try centered, which is going to center both the network name and the icon and stack them. So here we go. It looks a little bit different, and this results in larger buttons, which can be good or bad. It really depends on the look you're going for and the location you're playing with, and how many networks you have enabled, as well as how many columns you have enabled. So it looks great here with 4 networks and 4 columns. It might not look so good if you had 8 networks and 2 columns, which would result in a really, really huge social sharing block. And we'll get into those settings in a moment here. So I've shown you the centered and left aligned options. Next up is the option to choose how many columns you'd like to display. Right now it's set to 4, and we have 4 networks, which is great, right? So we have these 4 networks, and we're choosing to make them each conform to a 4-column grid, meaning each button is always going to be 25% width, which looks great. But let's say we have 4 networks. Let's say we change it to 5 columns. That's going to result in an empty space here because we have 5 columns and we don't have a 5th button to fill that column. You can also change it to 2 columns, which would look good since we have 4 networks. 2 columns looks good. As I mentioned before, the smaller the column width and the more networks you have, the bigger this kind of block of sharing buttons gets. And so depending on the social sharing location you're working with, we're working with inline right now, You might want to tone these down a bit because they're really kind of getting in the way of the content, I think. And I think that in this case, when we have 4 networks, a 4-column grid looks great. So that's how columns work. Now you can also choose to not use columns at all and use auto width. What that means, here's the auto width setting. That means the size of the buttons will never be bigger than is required by the content within them. That is to say that they will grow as the content within them grows. For example, they'll get bigger when you enable social share counts, right? Because that adds information to the button. The button is going to get a little bigger, but it'll never force itself to be conform to that strict column grid. It'll only be as big as it needs to be. Let me show you what it means. There we go. So the buttons are a lot smaller here because they're only as big as they need to be to house this information. So if you have a lot of buttons, you're trying to squish into one line, you want to get even more than 6 buttons into one row, then you can choose not to use columns. You can choose to use auto width, and you can fit as many in here as you like. And you can start disabling certain information to make them even smaller. So if we disabled network names, these buttons would be just nice little squares, and you can probably fit 20 of them here in a row. Again, these settings, you can play with them based on how many networks you have and the kind of design and look you're going for. So we give you a lot of freedom to adjust those however you like. So I'm going to change back to 4 columns, and I'm going to enable share counts. So we already went over this, and it works the same way here in Inline, but let me just enable them to show you how it affects the design. In this case, since we're using the centered aligned, it's actually going to make the button even taller because it adds a new bit of information below. Now you could play, if those buttons are a little bit too big, but you really wanted to display share counts, well then you could disable network names, which will make the buttons shorter, or not as tall. And you could even disable share counts and have just an icon, just like that. So you can really get as simple or as advanced as you like with these buttons. You have all the settings there that you need. Okay, so we've gone over share counts. We've gone over total shares, which works the same way as it does in the floating sidebar. We've gone over the network names. The next option, remove icon spacing, works the same way as in the floating sidebar, but it gives you a bit of a different effect, so I'm going to enable it here. You can see when I remove the spacing, it creates one big block here, which is a pretty cool effect, and you can choose to enable that if you think it works well with your design. Finally, we have the hide on mobile devices, which also works the same in all the different locations. You can choose to disable this location on mobile devices if you like. If I have this enabled and I load this page on my phone, those inline sharing buttons, they won't appear at all. Finally, our color settings. These work the same way everywhere, so I can adjust the background color and the hover color. Save that. Refresh. There you go. So I've changed it to red background color and an orange hover color. Yeah, so that's a basic overview of the inline sharing buttons. Next, let's move on to the Flyin. Before we can begin configuring the Flyin, we first have to enable the Flyin social sharing location. So let's head back to our Locations tab. We're going to disable Inline and enable Flyin and save. And just to remind you what the Flyin is, let's refresh our post and take another look at it. So here's the Flyin box. It animates in from the bottom corner of your page and asks your visitors to share. It does a great job of grabbing their attention because it kind of pops in and it's very noticeable. So to configure the Flyin, we're going to go over to the Flyin tab here, and you're going to recognize again most of these settings: the icon style, the hover style, the icon shape. Now there are some new settings in the Flyin which are title and message. So here you can see this box has a big title here and a message below it. You can configure both of those to say whatever you like. So you can change that to tell your friends, and you can also disable either of these by simply deleting the text inside the boxes. So I have disabled the message and I've changed the title. Next up we have the location of the Flyin. You can choose bottom right or bottom left. As you saw previously, it was bottom right, but if we change that to bottom left, it'd be over here. Again, you can adjust the columns, so this works just like it does everywhere else. But keep in mind that you are dealing with a much smaller area here than you have been with the inline settings, which means smaller columns are available and look better. So here we have 2 columns enabled, we have 4 locations, so that looks great. Even a single column grid would look pretty good here, so we can change that to 1 column. You can see the effect you get there. And you can also choose auto width, which, as I said, will the buttons will only be as big as they need to be. But I think 2 columns looks the best in our particular situation, with 4 networks being enabled. Next up is the intro animation. So right now it's set to flip. This affects the animation that is used for the Flyin when it appears. And then we have a bunch of great and fun options here. So if we want to change flip to, let's say, slide up, so we want to slide up from the bottom of the page, we can do that. Let's take a look at what that looks like. Scroll down, and there you go, it slides up. So you can play with these, but there's a lot of fun options there. Okay, so now we get into the triggers, and this is where the Flyin and the Popup locations are quite unique. And that is, you can choose how those Flyin and Popups are triggered based on the user engagement on your page. So there's 3 options. You can choose to automatically show the pop-up based on a timing delay. So if we set that up for the Flyin, and we chose automatically display the Flyin after 5 seconds, then no matter what, when someone visits that page and you wait 5 seconds, they're going to get greeted with the Flyin. So that means that no matter what, everyone's going to see that Flyin. The next trigger is trigger on page leave, which is going to catch all the visitors that are bouncing away and leaving your website. It's going to ask them to share before they leave. So if they've landed on your page, they've read your post, you know, they came in from Google, they searched some search term, they landed on your post, they loved it, they read it all, but now they're done, they're going to go back to Google and continue searching. Well, as they go to hit their back button, we're going to greet them with that little Flyin and say, hey, why don't you share this post with your friends? It's a great way to promote sharing. And then the final trigger is trigger at bottom of the post, which means that as the visitors are finished reading the post, when they're most engaged, and only when they're engaged, when they've actually read your post, when they reach the bottom and they're done, and we detect that they've reached the end, we're going to display that Flyin and ask them to share. So all these options, they work well in different situations, and they target your visitors based on certain visitor engagement triggers. And so you can enable all of these triggers, or you can enable just one of them, and you can even enable both the Popup and the Flyin and have them triggered based on different interactions to serve different purposes. So let's take a look at each of these. The automatic pop-up, when you enable that, you're going to get a timing delay option, which is how many seconds you want to wait before that Flyin is displayed automatically. If it's set to 5 seconds, we refresh the page and we wait for 5 seconds, that Flyin will appear. So there it is. Next is the trigger on page leave option. So if we enable that and refresh the page, so I'm reading the post, nothing's happening, I'm done reading the post, see my mouse here, I go to click back, and the Flyin comes in, hey wait, why don't you share the post before you leave? Next up is trigger at the bottom of the post. So if we enable that option and refresh, so I'm a visitor, I'm enjoying this post, I'm reading it, and I get down to the bottom, and right when I hit the bottom and I'm done, we get the Flyin asking them to share. So yep, those are the 3 basic triggers. And then in addition to that, you can also choose to limit the amount of times that Flyin is shown per visitor on a session basis. So basically, if you think, wow, all these triggers, you know, all these pop-ups and Flyins, it's just too much. I don't want my visitors to see one of these on every single post they go to. I want to just make it a little bit less aggressive, but I still want to increase my sharing and use this location. So I want to display the Flyin only once per session, which means if someone visits your page, they see the pop-up, they close the pop-up, they go to the next page, they won't see a pop-up again until their session duration is over. And you can control that session duration here in a matter of days. So right now it's set to 7 days, which means if this is enabled, someone visits your page, They read a post, they see the Flyin box, they closed it. They're not going to see any more Flyin boxes for at least a week. So it's a great way to control how aggressive you are with your pop-ups and your Flyin boxes. Next up is the display share counts. We've already gone over that. It works the same way in all locations. The display total shares also works the same way. Display networks names, the same way. Removing icon spacing and hiding on mobile devices. You are familiar with all these options from the previous settings. So we'll continue on. Color settings, same thing. You can choose the background color, hover color, and then the post type settings. You can choose where this Flyin is located on a post type basis. So you can disable it for your posts, enable it for pages, disable it for pages, enable it only for posts or any other post type that you're using on your website. Okay, so that's how Flyins work. Let's move on to pop-ups, which are very similar, and explore those settings. Before we can play with the pop-up settings, we first have to enable the pop-up location. So head back to the Locations tab. I'm going to disable the Flyin and enable the pop-up. Okay, in case you've forgotten what the pop-up looks like, let me remind you. I'm going to refresh the page. And here's the pop-up. It's a basic lightbox window with the social sharing buttons configured as you have in all of the different locations. You can adjust the columns, the information within them, etc. So let's head back to the pop-up settings. You'll recognize almost all these options from the inline settings we just went over. Icon hover style, shape, the title and the message, which can be configured or deleted completely. The display settings, which icon alignment, you remember what that is, the number of columns. The intro animation works just like the Flyin. You have the 3 basic triggers: enable automatic pop-up, trigger on page leave, or trigger at the bottom of post. You have the display once per session, which limits how many times that pop-up is displayed based on a per day basis, a session basis that you can control. Display minimum share counts. You can display the total share counts, a tally of your total shares. You can enable or disable network names, remove icon spacing, and hide on mobile devices. You have the same color settings and the same post type settings, which control where that pop-up appears on your website. Now, let's think about some creative ways that we can utilize these triggers when both the Flyin and the pop-up are enabled. So let's enable both of these. So you have pop-up and Flyin enabled. I'm going to go over to the pop-up settings and go down to our triggers. So let's just think of a hypothetical situation here. You have a post and you want to get as many shares as you can out of that post using these triggers without annoying your visitors. So we have these three triggers to work with, and we have different types of visitors that we want to engage with. So let's say we have the visitor that's come into your site through Google, they've read the post, they're very engaged with your post, and we'd like to encourage that person after they finish reading the post to share it. That's a perfect place for a Flyin. Now, what about the visitor who's leaving your page, the bouncing visitor, the lost visitor, the one you want to reclaim before he or she leaves? That's a great opportunity for the trigger on page leave. So how about instead of enabling both the pop-up and the Flyin for the same triggers, we can mix and match the triggers and use them for the 2 types of visitors I just talked about. So here we have our pop-up settings. I'm going to enable the trigger on page leave only and leave the rest disabled. So now the pop-up's going to pop up when the visitor's about to leave. Now on the Flyin settings, I'm going to only use the bottom of the post trigger. And so once the visitor reaches the bottom of the post, they're finished reading the post, they're going to get the Flyin option. So let's go over how those might work. So I'm a new visitor. I just landed on Google. I decided I don't want to continue viewing your site. I'm about to leave. Hit the back button, and then the pop-up displays one last effort to try to reclaim that visitor and get them to share your post. Now, at the same time, if a visitor has landed on this page and they're engaged and they're reading your post and they reach the bottom, you're going to get the Flyin as well. So this captures that visitor, the engaged visitor. So you're kind of capturing 2 potential shares from 2 different types of visitors using these different triggers in creative ways. So that's how you can use both the Flyin and the pop-up together. Okay, so we've gone over Flyin and pop-ups. Next up is the on media location. As before we can explore the on media options, we first have to enable that location. So head back to the locations tab and toggle off these pop-ups and fly-ins and enable just the media. Save. And in case you've forgotten, the media sharing option automatically adds buttons on hover when you hover over images on your post to try to promote the sharing of images on your website. Head over to the on media tab to get all the different options. You can recognize all of these options from our other media locations. You have the icon style, which is the hover. You have the icon shape. You can choose the column grid. You can choose to display or not to display share counts, total share counts, network names. You can remove or add icon spacing, and you can hide or show on mobile devices. Color settings, the same basic color settings. You can choose to use custom colors and customize the background color and the hover color of both the background and the icon. And finally, you can choose to enable or disable this on posts. So on media also comes with a shortcode that you can use. So if you want to learn more about that, be sure to check out that tutorial. I'm not going to go into full detail here, but the basic idea is that you can enable social sharing, or you can enable media sharing, and you can disable it on your posts actually. If you think, you know what, it's a bit too aggressive, I don't want every single one of my images to be shareable. I want to pick and choose certain posts that have good shareable images and enable media sharing on there. And I even want to pick particular images that I want to be shareable. This is good also for copyright issues. If you have images on your website you don't want to be shareable, you have other images that you created and you want those to be shareable, you can use the shortcode to just enable social sharing on individual images, and here you can actually just disable automatic image sharing on posts. So be sure to check out that tutorial for more information about the on media shortcode. Alright, so we've basically gone over everything, all the social sharing stuff for Monarch. So we've covered the main kind of feature of Monarch, which is social sharing, but that's not all that Monarch does. We also have the social following aspect, which, unlike social sharing, which is promoting visitors to share posts to their friends, the social follow helps encourage visitors to follow you on your social profiles. So now we're going to go into the social follow settings. Now, in case you've forgotten what social follow buttons look like, here's our demo post, and here are the social follow buttons. They linked out to your social profiles and display your social follow count. So this is a great way to get more followers and also a great way to display social proof. It tallies up your total followers here, which is great for new visitors to see. This is an example of our social follow widget, which displays your social follow buttons in any widgetized area on your website. And you can also create a social follow shortcode that you can use to display your social follow buttons anywhere on your website, whether it's a post or page or otherwise. So let's take a look at our social follow settings. You're going to want to click the social follow tab to reveal the various settings within it. Now, before we can display a social follow widget or shortcode, you first need to add your networks, much like you did for social sharing. There's a unique network selection for social follow. So go to networks and click add network and choose the various networks that you're a part of that you would like to promote. Once they're added, you can drag and drop their order, and then you're going to want to fill in all the different settings here. So there's 2 to 3 different settings for each network depending on how that network works. Facebook here, so you see this is the label. That's the name of the network. If you want to change that or customize that for whatever reason, abbreviate it or make it all capital letters, customize it in whatever way you want, you can do so there. Next up is the URL field, which will link out to your profile URL. So this is where the button goes when it's clicked, and you're going to want to point it to your Facebook page. So our Facebook page happens to be facebook.com/elegantthemes, and yours will be whatever your business is named. Next up is the name field, which is your Facebook business name, your Facebook page name. In our case, it's Elegant Themes. In your case, it might be different. And it also might not even be a name at all, because Facebook doesn't let you have a real business name, a real page name, until you've reached a certain follower count. So you might actually have a number for your Facebook page name, and you're going to see that number in your URL, and you're going to want to input that there instead of your business name. And we go over more about this in the in the networks tutorial. So be sure to check out that tutorial if you need more information. Next up is the follower count. Here you can input how many followers you have. That's going to affect that number that's displayed within the button. So we have 35,000 Facebook followers. So you want to put that number in there. Next up is Twitter. Same thing. Input your URL. Ours happens to be twitter.com/elegantthemes, and our follower count is 19,500 at the moment. And then, continue to fill in all this stuff. So I'm not going to waste too much more time here with that. Now, a lot of these networks, we have no option but to input the follower count manually, but luckily some of the bigger networks have allowed us to grab that count automatically, which means you don't have to keep coming in here and updating your follower count as you get more followers. It's automatically going to connect to that network's API, grab that count, cache it, and display it, which is great, but it's only supported by some networks. And the option to enable that is down here under display settings. You see the get counts via API setting. If I click that, then for those networks that allow it, you're going to see that the count option has gone away and just a green check mark has been added in its place, which means no work is required here. We're taking care of the count automatically. You don't have to input it. Now, in addition to that, there's also various API settings for certain networks that require a bit more authentication before they allow us to grab that count automatically. And those networks that support authentication are listed here, and you can go through and authorize your website with each of these, which will allow us to grab those follower counts automatically, just like we showed there with Facebook. I'm not going to go into too much more detail here. You can check out our other tutorial about API settings for a complete walkthrough of all these different networks. Okay, so we've added our networks. I'm going to save and then move on to the widget settings. So to configure your widget, go ahead and click on the widget tab to reveal all the settings. And you're going to recognize all these settings from the social sharing display settings we've seen before. You have your icon style, which is the hover style, the icon shape, which adjusts the shape of the button. You have your icon placement, the number of columns. You can choose to enable or disable share counts, total followers, and network names. And you can also change the color of the network names depending on the background color of your website. You can enable or disable icon spacing and hide on mobile devices. Finally, you can adjust your color settings, and that's all the settings for the widget. So once you've configured the appearance of your social follow widget, the next step is to add that widget to a widgetized area. So for example, here's a post with a sidebar. This is a widgetized sidebar, which means each of these locations, each of these items here is a widget inside the sidebar. We have our recent post widget, our recent comment widget, archives, and so on. And we can add a Monarch follow widget into that sidebar. And to do so, you want to go to Appearances, Widgets, and find the Monarch follow widget. Here it is. You're just going to drag that into the widgetized area of your choice, and you're done. I'm going to refresh. You can see that the widget has been added. And now that it's been added, you can adjust those settings we were going over before. So under Tools, Monarch Settings, Social Follow, Widget, any of the settings you change here will affect the appearance of that widget here. So let's just change one to give you an example. I'm going to enable icon circles and refresh, and there we go. So let's change the shape of the button to a circle icon. And that's a basic overview of the widget. Again, you can place that in any widgetized area. So for example, in Divi, we have a footer area that's widgetized. You can place it in your footer, you can place it in your sidebar, anywhere else that supports widgets. Okay, next up, and finally, we're gonna go over the shortcode location for social follow, which allows you to generate a social follow shortcode to display those buttons anywhere. Okay, to generate a new shortcode, you just need to click on the Shortcode tab here, which will give you all the settings for the to configure your shortcode, as well as a button to generate that shortcode. So these settings work just like the widget settings that we just went over. The only difference is at the very bottom, after you've configured everything, you can click the Generate Shortcode button, and it's going to give you a shortcode that you can then place anywhere on your website to display those buttons based on the settings you configured. And then you can come back here at a later time, change the settings, and generate a new shortcode, and both those shortcodes will work independently based on the settings that you selected when you generated them, which is a great way to customize the buttons on different locations of your website. So just with the basic options here, without customizing anything, we have this flip animation, the rounded rectangle shape. We chose our icon placement to be top, our columns to be 4. We chose to display follower counts. We chose to not display total followers. We chose to display network names. We chose our outer text to be dark since our background color is white. We chose not to remove the icon spacing and not to hide it on mobile devices. We didn't use any custom colors, which means it'll use the default network colors. We clicked Generate Shortcode, and it gave us this shortcode. Now you can just copy that shortcode, right click, copy, and then you can paste it within any post or page to display this shortcode. So here we have a post. Let's just say that within this post, at the very bottom, I write a sentence that invites our visitors to like us on Facebook and Twitter, and I want to follow up that request with some nice buttons that link to those profiles that I mentioned. That will really improve the amount of followers that we get if we give them a clear way to follow us. So if we edit this post, scroll down to the bottom and just paste in that shortcode we just copied, just like that, and then update it. When you view the post, you're going to see those buttons have been added there at the bottom based on the settings that we configured when we generated the shortcode. If we wanted to change that, we could go back and change the settings. We could, let's say, remove the icon spacing, change the icon placement to the left, and generate that shortcode instead. So copy that, edit the post. I want to replace that shortcode with our new one. Update. And then you can see that the layout has changed based on those new settings that we configured. And you can use that shortcode anywhere on your website. For example, if you're using the Divi theme, you could even place it within a text module. It really works just about anywhere, which gives you a lot of flexibility as to where those social follow buttons can be placed. Okay, so we've covered all the different social sharing and social follow options. The next step is to go over the general settings, which are pretty simple. So I'm going to click on the General Settings tab here. And we have two settings. So one is the frequency of count updates. What that does is adjust how often the counts that we track and that we grab from social networks that support APIs. This adjusts how often we grab those counts and cache them. So right now it's set to 0. That means we're not using a cache at all. Every time the page is loading, we're querying the database and we're grabbing those numbers. We're contacting Facebook and grabbing those numbers and getting the right count for that exact moment. Now that's great. It's very accurate. The problem is it can slow down your site. It's an extra thing you have to load. There's an extra thing the page has to do. So to really speed things up, we've added our own caching system, which grabs the numbers from Facebook or wherever and saves them to the database so that we can just grab them very quickly without any kind of external connection. So for example, you could just choose to have these update every 3 hours, and every 3 hours it'll grab the counts, and it'll never cause a bunch of increased loading time. Next up is the custom CSS box, where you can just input any custom CSS you would like to use for the plugin, so you don't have to edit your theme or create a child theme just to edit some Monarch CSS. You can just input custom CSS here. All right, that covers the general settings tabs. The next two things we're going to cover are stats and importing and exporting settings. So let's go over those now. First up are the Monarch stats. The stats page gives you an overview of all the social sharing, liking, and following activity on your website, which is very useful. You can use it to figure out how your website's doing. You can also use it to see the difference between the sharing activity of different social locations. For example, let's say you start off using Monarch, you just activate the inline sharing buttons, the most basic buttons. You can track the social sharing activity from those buttons. And then let's say next week you want to try out some different locations. You enable Flyin and Popup, and you see, wow, look how many more shares I'm getting this week. All those new shares are coming from these new locations, and you can kind of play with the different locations and then monitor your stats and really figure out what's the best combination of sharing locations for you and your visitors and your demographic and how they use your website. So to locate your stats, just click on the stats icon up here, and this is going to give you an overview of all the different activity on your site. It's broken down into social shares, likes, and follow. So shares are the shares you're getting on Facebook and Twitter and so on. Likes, that's the native like. So there's a native liking button. It's a heart button that allows someone to say, kind of just vote for a page. You know, like I like this page. It's a great way to kind of track internal liking activity to see how your visitors kind of just gauge. It's a great way to gauge the popularity and the success of each post without actually asking anyone to share it on their Facebook feed. So you'll see this kind of native liking on a lot of different websites, and so we break that out from the shares because it is a little bit different. Next up is the social follow activity. That tells you how many times people have clicked on to follow you on your basic follower profiles from the social follow buttons. And the social sharing activity is broken down into some bar graphs here based on the past 7 days, 30 days, and also 12 months. So you can really kind of look at the trends and see how your website's doing for each day of the week and each month of the year. We break down the social sharing stats based on the network. So here, this is for Facebook, Pinterest, Twitter, and so on. So yeah, I really encourage you to take a look at these stats and get an idea for how your website's doing and how your website's performing based on the combination of locations you have enabled and the different design settings you've chosen for those locations. Next up is the importing and exporting feature. So this icon right here is the ImportExport icon. Click that to bring you to the ImportExport settings. And what this allows you to do is once you've configured a Monarch website, if you want to export those settings and import them into another website, you can do that. So let's say you have a website, you've installed Monarch, you spent a lot of time configuring every single location to be perfect for your website, you're getting the most shares, it's working great, and you're starting a new website, and you don't want to have to go through all those settings and figure out what you did and do it all over again. Well, in that case, you can just export the settings from your current website, import them to your new website, and you're done. So, for example, click export. That's going to automatically download a JSON file. Then you go to your new website, click choose file, find that file you just downloaded. That's the one I downloaded right there. You'd click open, and then you click import, and that would import all the settings. You're done. All right, so that is a basic overview of Monarch. I've gone over the difference between social sharing and social following. I've showed you the 5 different sharing locations and the settings for each. And I've shown you the 2 different social follow locations and the settings for each of those. If you have any questions, be sure to swing by the support forums. If you are confused about anything, well then I encourage you to go into the individual tutorials, because we have a lot of tutorials that go into depth about each social sharing location and all the settings and how they work. And I go into more detail there than I have here. And so if you're confused, I encourage you to check those out first. Those are all on our documentation page.